The evening light faded slowly across the window, and she sat quietly, watching how the last bit of sun touched the corner of her small living room. Everything around her felt still, too still, like the world had gone silent. She had spent so many days inside this same space, surrounded by things that once brought her comfort but now only reminded her of how much had changed. The laughter, the noise, the warmth, all gone. It had been months since her life started falling apart. One thing after another, it all slipped away. Her job, her confidence, and the man she thought she would grow old with. Each loss came quietly, leaving a heavy emptiness she didn't know how to fill. In the beginning, she tried to stay strong. She kept telling herself that this was just a phase, that things would get better. But days turned into weeks and weeks into months, and nothing really changed. She had once been the kind of woman who smiled easily. People often came to her for advice because she had a way of making others feel lighter. But now even her reflection seemed like a stranger. The woman she saw in the mirror looked tired. Her eyes didn't shine the way they used to. Her smile was forced, as if she was trying to convince herself she was fine when deep down she wasn't. Her mornings had become routine. She woke up, made a cup of coffee, and stared at the cup until it went cold. Sometimes she scrolled through her phone, reading messages from friends she no longer had the energy to reply to. They had stopped reaching out as often, probably unsure of what to say anymore. She didn't blame them. She didn't know what to say either. The silence in her apartment became her closest companion. She would turn on the TV just to hear voices, but even that didn't help much. She missed the feeling of being part of something, part of someone's day, part of a life that had meaning. One morning, she received a message from an old neighbor inviting her to a small community event at the local center. At first, she ignored it. She had no reason to go. What would she say to people who probably remembered her as the cheerful woman who always smiled? The thought of facing anyone who might ask how she'd been made her stomach turn. But later that evening, when the walls of her apartment started closing in again, she decided to go. Maybe sitting around other people, even strangers, would make her feel less invisible. When she arrived, the place was already busy. There were families, old friends greeting each other, and the soft sound of music playing in the background. She stood near the doorway, unsure where to go or what to do. A woman she vaguely remembered from the neighborhood smiled and waved her over, so she went, trying her best to act normal. They talked for a few minutes about simple things: the weather, the city, how fast time seemed to move. She nodded, smiled when she could, and kept her answers short. Inside, she felt drained. She wanted to leave, but leaving would mean going back to that empty apartment, and she wasn't ready for that yet. That was when she noticed him. He wasn't the kind of man who drew attention right away. There was something calm about him, quiet but present. He was helping the event staff set up tables, moving things around without being asked, always with a small smile. When their eyes met, she looked away quickly, embarrassed for staring. But later, he came over carrying a tray of coffee cups, offering one to her with a gentle smile. "Would you like one?" he asked, his voice kind and simple. She hesitated before taking it. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded and sat across from her, not saying much at first. There was no awkwardness, just a quiet understanding. After a few moments, he asked how she was finding the event. She shrugged and said it was nice. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, as if she hadn't spoken to anyone in days, which was true. He talked about small things, the music, how good the coffee smelled, how this community center used to be busier years ago. His words were light, easy to follow. She found herself listening more than speaking, but he didn't seem to mind. He wasn't trying to fill the silence. He was simply sharing space with her. At one point, she looked up and said quietly, "You must think it's strange, me sitting here alone." He shook his head. "Not strange. Sometimes being around people doesn't mean you're ready to talk. It's enough just to be here." Something in the way he said it made her chest tighten. It had been a long time since anyone understood without asking for explanations. For the first time in months, she felt seen. They talked for a while longer, and when she finally stood up to leave, he said, "It was nice talking with you." She smiled, a real one this time, and said, "You too." That night, as she sat by her window again, she thought about the man from the community center. It wasn't anything romantic or dramatic, just the warmth of a simple conversation that didn't make her feel like a burden. For once, someone hadn't looked at her with pity. That alone felt different. The next few days went by as usual, but something in her had shifted. She couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the way he listened, or maybe it was just that small reminder that she was still part of the world outside her apartment. Either way, she found herself smiling at the memory of that short encounter. The following week, she went back to the community center. She told herself it was just for a change of scenery, but deep down she hoped she might see him again. And she did. He was there helping set up chairs this time, laughing softly with one of the volunteers. When he saw her, his face lit up slightly and he waved. "You came back," he said. "Walking over?" "I guess I did," she replied a little shyly. They sat together again, talking about ordinary things and nothing deep or heavy. Yet every small exchange felt strangely comforting. She didn't realize how much she'd missed this. The sound of her own voice in conversation, the way laughter felt when it came naturally. After the event ended, he offered to walk her home since they lived nearby. She wanted to say no out of habit, but something made her agree. The walk was short, filled with small talk and quiet pauses that didn't feel uncomfortable. When they reached her building, he said, "It's good you came out today. Sometimes small steps matter more than big ones." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "It's been hard lately," she admitted. "I keep trying to find reasons to get up, but it's not easy." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said softly, "You don't have to have all the reasons. Sometimes just showing up is enough." Those words stayed with her long after he left. She replayed them in her head, not because they were profound, but because they were true. For months she had been trying to make sense of her pain, to fix everything at once. Maybe she didn't need to. Maybe just taking one step at a time was enough for now. The next morning felt slightly different. The same apartment, the same walls, but the air didn't feel so heavy. She made coffee and actually drank it while it was still warm. When she looked out the window, the light seemed a little brighter, not because the world had changed, but because something in her had. She didn't know where things would go from here. She didn't even know if she'd see him again. But the thought of it didn't fill her with fear or sadness. Instead, it gave her a small flicker of hope, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. And that was enough for now. The following days moved slower than usual, but this time she didn't mind it. Each morning felt a little lighter than the last. She found herself thinking about the conversations they had shared, the way he listened, the calm in his voice, and how he never looked at her with pity. It was strange how one simple encounter could soften something so heavy inside her. It had been months since she had genuinely looked forward to anything, but now she caught herself hoping to run into him again. She didn't even know much about him. Not where he worked, not his story, not what kind of life he led. But she remembered the way he made her feel. Not fixed, not rescued, just human again. A few days later, she decided to visit the park near her building. It was a quiet afternoon. The trees whispered with the soft wind and the smell of fresh grass filled the air. She sat on her favorite bench, the one she hadn't visited in months. People passed by, parents pushing strollers, children chasing pigeons, couples sharing snacks, scenes that once made her feel like an outsider but now brought a quiet comfort. She had been sitting there for a while, lost in her thoughts when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "I thought I'd find you here." She turned around surprised. It was him, holding a paper cup in each hand. "I brought coffee," he said with a small smile. "You still take it with sugar, right?" She blinked, caught off guard. "You remembered?" "Of course," he said lightly. "You made a face when you tried the black coffee last time." "I don't think I could forget that." She laughed softly, a sound that even surprised her. It had been a long time since she had laughed without forcing it. He handed her the cup and they sat side by side, watching the world around them move. Their conversations always started simple, about the weather, about the people walking by, about music or food. But as time passed, the talks grew deeper without feeling heavy. She found herself telling him things she hadn't told anyone, how she felt lost after losing her job, how she struggled to find motivation each day, and how some mornings it was hard to even get out of bed. He didn't interrupt or rush to give advice. He just listened, nodding quietly, sometimes saying things like, "That must have been hard," or "You handled more than most could." His voice was gentle, never demanding or filled with judgment. She noticed something about him. He carried a calmness that made people want to stay. There was no sense of urgency when he spoke, No pressure to be someone she wasn't. When she stumbled over her words or paused to find her thoughts, he waited patiently. That patience was something she hadn't felt from anyone in a long time. After a while, she began asking him about his life. He wasn't one to talk much about himself, but slowly, she learned that he lived nearby and helped organize community activities whenever he could. He worked quietly, preferred staying out of the spotlight, and enjoyed spending time outdoors. He spoke fondly about simple things: a walk in the evening, good coffee, old music, the kind of details that made life feel warm again. When they parted ways that day, she went home with something she hadn't felt in years: ease. The silence in her apartment didn't bother her anymore. Instead, it felt peaceful. She started lighting candles again in the evening, turning on soft music, and even cooking for herself instead of ordering takeout. It wasn't about changing her life overnight. It was about feeling present in small moments. As weeks passed, they saw each other more often. Sometimes they met at the park, sometimes at the community center, and sometimes by coincidence at the cafe on the corner. It always felt easy between them. No pressure, no expectations. One afternoon, while they were walking home from the park, she looked at him and asked, "Why are you always so kind to me?" He smiled slightly, his eyes still forward. "Because kindness doesn't need a reason. We all need someone to remind us that we matter sometimes." His words stayed with her long after they parted. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about them. Maybe it wasn't about pity. Maybe it was about someone seeing her for who she was, not for what she had lost. The next morning, she woke up early, opened her windows, and let the sunlight pour in. It had been a long time since she'd done that. She looked around her apartment, and it was still the same, but it felt different. Maybe it was her heart that had changed. She picked up a notebook and began writing down thoughts, things she wanted to do, small goals like visiting her favorite bookstore again or repainting her kitchen. When she told him about it later that week, he grinned. "That's good. Start with the small things. They're usually the ones that matter most," she smiled. "I think I forgot that for a long time." "Then it's a good thing you remembered," he said softly. Their friendship grew naturally. They never talked about labels or what it meant. It was just two people sharing time and stories, both carrying their own scars but finding peace in each other's company. She noticed that he never asked about her past relationship or the people who had hurt her. He didn't need to. He focused on the person she was now, the woman learning to smile again. One rainy evening, they met at the cafe near the community center. The soft tapping of rain against the windows filled the quiet space. He arrived first and waved her over with that same easy smile. "Rainy days are my favorite," he said as she sat down. "Everything slows down. Feels like the world is taking a deep breath." She laughed gently. "I used to hate the rain. It made me feel lonelier. And now?" he asked. "Now," she said after a pause, "it feels peaceful. Maybe because I'm not alone in it anymore." He looked at her for a moment, and something in his eyes softened. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The silence between them said enough. As they talked, she realized how much lighter her laughter sounded now. The heaviness that used to cling to her voice was fading away. Every time she looked at him, she felt a warmth she couldn't explain. It wasn't love, at least not yet, but it was something gentle and real. When they stepped outside after their coffee, the rain had stopped, and the sky was beginning to clear. He offered her his jacket, and though she refused at first, he insisted with a teasing smile. "Just take it. You'll catch a cold, and then I'll have to hear you complain about it later." She laughed, shaking her head but taking it anyway. The jacket was warm, and it smelled faintly of coffee and rain. As they walked together under the gray sky, she realized something simple but powerful. She wasn't thinking about the past anymore. For months, her thoughts had been chained to everything she had lost, but now her mind was here in this moment with someone who made her feel seen. When they reached her building, she hesitated before saying goodbye. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" he asked. "For showing up," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "For listening. For reminding me that life still has good people in it." He smiled softly. "You'd be surprised how much good still exists, even in the quiet corners." That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed replaying their walk, his words, his smile. For the first time in so long, she wasn't thinking about what had gone wrong. She was thinking about what could go right. She didn't know where this connection would lead or if it even needed to lead anywhere. All she knew was that it made her heart feel alive again, and that was enough. The next day she took a bold step. She signed up to volunteer at the community center. It wasn't something big, but it felt like a beginning. When she told him, he grinned widely. "That's amazing," he said. "You're really doing it." She shrugged, pretending to be casual, but inside she was proud. "Just trying to do something different." "That's how it always starts," he replied. One small change, then another. As the days went by, she began meeting new people through her volunteering work. Slowly, she started feeling part of something again, and though she didn't realize it at first, the sadness that had once lived inside her began to fade quietly, replaced by a gentle sense of hope. Every now and then, she'd catch herself smiling for no reason, sometimes while walking to the center, sometimes while washing dishes, sometimes when she remembered something he said. It was the kind of joy that didn't need to be loud. It was steady, peaceful, and real. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like someone waiting for life to happen. She was part of it again, and deep inside she knew this was only the beginning of something that could heal her completely. The following months brought small but beautiful changes in her life. She didn't even notice how much she was transforming, until one morning she woke up and realized she was actually excited for the day. That feeling had been missing for so long that it almost startled her. The community center had become a second home. Volunteering there gave her something to look forward to, something that made her feel useful again. She loved watching people come in and out, laughing, sharing stories, and helping one another. She started talking to new faces, slowly learning that everyone had their own quiet battles. It made her realize she wasn't alone in her struggles. He was there most days, too. Sometimes he helped organize events, sometimes he fixed things that were broken, and sometimes he just stayed around to make people laugh. She noticed how others gravitated toward him, not because he was loud or charming, but because he made everyone feel comfortable. He had that rare kind of presence that felt safe, like a calm voice on a stormy day. Whenever they crossed paths, their eyes met with a small, unspoken warmth. They didn't need to say much. Their connection was built on quiet understanding. Some days they would share coffee during breaks. Other times they'd end up walking home together, talking about life, memories, and dreams they had buried long ago. One afternoon, after the center had closed, he found her sitting alone, painting something on a piece of cardboard. He watched for a moment before asking, "You paint?" She smiled shyly. "I used to, a long time ago. I just found some leftover colors in the storeroom, so I thought, why not?" He sat beside her. "That's beautiful," he said softly. "You have a gift." She looked at the half-finished painting and shook her head. "It's nothing special. I just do it to calm my mind." "Maybe," he said, "but sometimes the things we call nothing special are what heal us the most." His words stayed with her. That night she went home and pulled out an old box from the back of her closet. Inside were dusty brushes, dried paints, and a few old sketches she had almost forgotten about. As she flipped through them, memories flooded back. The smell of fresh paint, the joy of creating something, the quiet peace it brought her. The next day, she bought a few new paints and canvases. It felt strange at first, like trying to reconnect with an old part of herself. But as the brush touched the canvas, she felt something awaken, a spark she thought was gone forever. When she told him about it later, his face lit up. "I'm glad you're doing that again," he said. "You always talk about your art with a softness in your voice. You should keep it alive." "I'm not sure if I'm any good anymore," she admitted. He smiled. "That's not the point. It's not about being good. It's about feeling alive when you do it." That evening she went home and painted for hours. She didn't care how it looked. She painted her feelings, the quiet mornings, the soft rain, the laughter they shared, and even the loneliness that used to live inside her. By the time she stopped, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. The next weekend, the community center planned a small local art show to support young artists. He encouraged her to take part, but she laughed it off. "Oh no," she said, "I'm not showing my work to anyone. I'm just painting for myself."
"Maybe you should reconsider," he said gently.
"Sometimes sharing what we love is how we grow." She hesitated but couldn't forget his words. For days she thought about it, unsure if she had the courage. Her mind filled with doubt. What if people didn't like it? What if they thought it was childish? What if it reminded her of how much she had lost? But another part of her whispered, maybe this is the chance to start over. Finally, on the morning of the event, she decided to bring one of her paintings. Her hands trembled as she carried it to the hall. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. A reflection of her journey from darkness back into light. When he saw her walk in holding the painting, his face broke into a proud smile. "You did it," he said softly. "That's all that matters." She placed it on a stand in the corner, hoping no one would notice it too much. But to her surprise, people did. A few visitors stopped to admire it, asking who the artist was. Each compliment felt surreal, like a tiny spark rebuilding her confidence piece by piece. Later that evening, as the event ended, he found her standing quietly near her painting. "You see?" he said. "Told you it would mean something." She smiled, eyes glistening. "It feels strange, in a good way. I didn't think anyone would care." "They care because it's real," he replied, "and because you had the courage to share it." For a moment, she couldn't speak. She just looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a warmth rise in her chest. It wasn't the kind of warmth that made her nervous or uncertain. It was steady, calm, and comforting. She realized that somewhere along the way, he had become part of her healing, not by doing grand things, but through quiet consistency and genuine care. Days turned into weeks, and they grew closer. They spent more time together, sometimes volunteering, sometimes just sitting in silence under the old oak tree near the park. She didn't need to pretend around him. He never asked her to be cheerful when she wasn't. He just let her be. One evening, as they watched the sunset together, she spoke softly. "You know, for a long time I thought people only stayed out of pity. I thought kindness always came with hidden sympathy, but you never made me feel small." He turned to her and said, "That's because you're not. You were never small. You just forgot your own strength for a while." Her eyes filled with quiet tears, not from sadness but from relief. No one had said that to her before, not like that. From that day, her confidence began to grow in ways she hadn't imagined. She started teaching art classes for children at the community center, guiding them to express their feelings through colors and shapes. Watching their small hands paint freely brought her pure joy. Every laugh, every messy stroke reminded her of how good it felt to create without fear. He often stopped by to watch her classes, leaning against the door with that familiar, gentle smile. "You're good at this," he'd say, and she'd laugh. "I'm just making a mess with them," she'd reply. But deep down she knew he meant it. One afternoon after the class ended, he stayed behind to help her clean up. As they packed the brushes and wiped the tables, she said quietly, "You've changed my life, you know." He looked up, a little surprised. "I didn't do anything," he said. "You did," she insisted. "You reminded me that I still have a life to live, that I can still do things that make me happy." He didn't respond right away. Then, in his calm way, he said, "Maybe you just needed someone to remind you of what you already had inside you." For a moment, they both stood there in silence. The sunlight filtered through the window, painting everything in a warm golden glow. She looked at him and realized that what she felt wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was something deeper, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel for a long time. When he left that evening, she stood by the window, watching him walk away. A quiet smile touched her lips. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't afraid of it anymore. She was living again, truly living. The rain had been falling since morning, turning the streets silver and soft. From her window, she could see people rushing under umbrellas, their reflections rippling in puddles. She loved the sound of rain now. It reminded her of quiet beginnings, not loneliness. She had started painting again that morning, letting the rhythm of the raindrops guide her brush. Her life had changed in quiet, gentle ways. It wasn't a sudden transformation, more like a slow sunrise that had taken its time to brighten everything. The walls of her apartment, once heavy with silence, now felt alive again. There were colors, laughter, music, and a sense of peace that she hadn't known for years. He had become a constant part of her days. They didn't need plans or schedules. They just found each other naturally. Sometimes he'd stop by the community center while she was teaching the children, bringing her coffee or snacks. Other times they'd walk together in the evening, talking about anything and everything that were their favorite songs, childhood memories, places they dreamed of visiting one day. The bond between them had grown deeper with time. It wasn't rushed and it wasn't forced. It simply existed, steady and real. There was a quiet comfort in knowing that someone cared without needing explanations or promises. One evening, after a long day at the center, she found him waiting outside with 2 steaming cups of tea. The air was cool and the streetlights cast a soft glow on the wet pavement. "You've been working hard," he said, handing her a cup. "You deserve a break." She smiled and took it, feeling the warmth spread through her hands. "You always seem to know when I need one," she said softly. He chuckled. "Maybe I'm just good at guessing." They walked together in silence for a while. The city around them hummed quietly. Cars passing, lights flickering, rain whispering against the rooftops. She looked at him and felt that same warmth she had felt so many times before, but now it was stronger, deeper. "I never thanked you properly," she said suddenly. "For what?" he asked. "For being there," she replied. "For not giving up on me when I was barely holding myself together." He looked at her for a moment, then said quietly, "You don't need to thank me for that. You did the hard part yourself. I just reminded you what you were capable of." His words touched something deep inside her. She had heard kind things before, but not like this. He didn't speak to make her feel better. He spoke the truth. That was what made his words matter. A few days later, the community center announced a larger art exhibition. The local press was invited, and artists from different neighborhoods would be showing their work. She had been asked to display her paintings again, but this time, she hesitated more than ever. It wasn't fear of judgment. It was the pressure she put on herself. She didn't want to disappoint anyone, especially him. When she told him about it, he noticed the worry in her voice. "You're thinking too much," he said. "This isn't about being perfect. It's about showing people how far you've come." "I just don't want to let anyone down," she said quietly. He smiled gently. "You could never let anyone down by being yourself. The only mistake would be hiding what you've worked so hard to create." His words lingered in her mind. That night she sat in front of her unfinished canvas and stared at it for hours. The colors blurred together under the warm light, but she didn't rush. She thought about where she had been. The dark days when she didn't want to wake up. The endless quiet. The loneliness. Then she thought about where she was now, surrounded by people, by hope, by new beginnings. She picked up her brush and began to paint again. This one was different. It wasn't just an image. It was her story. Every stroke carried a piece of her journey. The pain, the healing, the gratitude. When she finished, tears welled up in her eyes, not from sadness but from pride. She had made it through. On the day of the exhibition, the hall buzzed with excitement. Artists moved around with nervous smiles, hanging their paintings, fixing small details. She arrived early, her hands trembling slightly as she placed her canvas on display. It was the first time she had shown something so personal. He arrived soon after, dressed neatly but casually, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. When she saw him, her nerves melted away a little. "Those are for you," he said, handing them to her. "For courage." She laughed softly, holding the flowers close. "Thank you. I'll need it." The event went better than she expected. People stopped to admire her work, asking questions and sharing kind words. She smiled genuinely, her confidence growing with every conversation. But what mattered most was when she saw him standing quietly across the room, watching her with pride in his eyes. That look meant more than any praise she received. Later, when the crowd began to thin and the lights dimmed, he walked up to her and said, "You were incredible today." She smiled, a little shyly. "It feels strange, you know. A few months ago, I couldn't even imagine being here, and now it's like I'm living someone else's life." He shook his head. "No, you're just finally living your life." They stepped outside together where the night air was cool and calm. The moon hung low, casting silver light on the quiet street. She took a deep breath, feeling something inside her settle, a peace she hadn't known before. "Do you ever think about how life brings people together?" she asked suddenly. "All the time," he replied. "Sometimes we cross paths with people at the exact moment we need them. Not sooner, not later. Just right." She turned to him, her voice soft. "I think that's what happened with us." He smiled gently but didn't say anything. Instead, he just looked at her. Not in the way people look when they're trying to impress or charm someone, but in the way someone looks when they truly see another person. That quiet gaze told her everything words couldn't. They began walking again side by side. At one point, their hands brushed lightly and she felt her heart skip. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. They just continued walking, their fingers eventually finding each other naturally as if it was the most effortless thing in the world. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of understanding, gratitude, and something unspoken that was slowly turning into love. As they reached her street, the sky began to drizzle lightly again. He offered to walk her to the door, but she stopped him halfway. "You've already walked with me far enough," she said softly. He smiled. "Then promise me one thing." "What?" "Keep walking, even on the days when I'm not around." She looked at him, her eyes warm. "I will." He nodded and turned to leave, but before he did, he glanced back and said, "I'm proud of you." Those simple words filled her with a joy she couldn't describe. She stood there long after he disappeared down the street, the rain touching her face like a blessing. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by her window watching the rain again, thinking about everything that had changed. Months ago, she had been broken, afraid, unsure of her worth. Now she was someone new, someone who had faced her pain, rebuilt her spirit, and found light in unexpected places. And though she didn't know what the future held, one thing was clear: she wasn't alone anymore. Even if life took them in different directions someday, she knew she would never go back to who she once was. He had shown her what it meant to be alive, not just to exist, but to feel, to hope, to love quietly without fear. For the first time, she didn't dread the morning. She was ready for it. The sun rose slowly that morning, spilling golden light through the curtains. She woke up feeling calm, something she still wasn't fully used to. There were no heavy thoughts waiting at the edge of her mind, no rush of sadness pressing on her chest. Instead, there was quiet peace, the kind that comes when a heart finally finds its rhythm again. She made coffee and sat by the window, the same spot where months ago she used to sit with her doubts. Now it was her favorite corner where she often painted, read, or just watched life moving outside. The world looked different now. Not perfect, but beautiful in its own small ways. Her phone buzzed. A message from him appeared. "Big day today." "Ready?" she smiled to herself. Today, she was starting a new art program for underprivileged kids. It was something she had dreamed of for years, but never had the courage to try. He had been the one who encouraged her, reminding her that her art wasn't meant to stay hidden. It was meant to touch people, to heal them the way it had healed her. She typed back, nervous but ready. A minute later, his reply came, "That's the perfect mix." "I'll be there early," she laughed softly. He always knew what to say to steady her. By mid-morning, the small community hall was alive with movement. Kids ran around excitedly, their laughter echoing against the walls. She arranged brushes and paints on the long tables, feeling her heart swell with gratitude. A few months ago, she wouldn't have believed this was her life. When he walked in, carrying boxes of snacks and supplies, her face lit up. "You're on time," she said teasingly. "I wasn't going to miss this," he replied. "It's your big moment." The class began, and soon the tables were covered in messy, colorful creations. She moved around, helping the children, praising their work, guiding their little hands. Every time she looked up, she caught him watching her with quiet pride. It wasn't about romance in that moment, it was about connection, respect, and shared joy. Later, when the children left, the room was quiet again. She sat on a chair, exhausted but smiling. "I can't believe it worked," she said. He sat across from her, his voice soft. "Of course it worked. You made it happen." She looked at him, realizing just how much his belief in her had changed everything. "Do you know what you did?" she asked. He raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "You reminded me that life doesn't end when something breaks. Sometimes it just begins again differently." He smiled gently. "I didn't remind you. You already knew. You just needed to hear it from someone who saw you clearly." She looked down for a moment, her chest tightening with emotion. "You're kind, you know that?" He shrugged with a playful grin. "Maybe, but you're brave." "I think that's better." That night when she went home, she couldn't stop smiling. She placed one of the children's drawings on her refrigerator, a simple picture of her surrounded by bright colors. It felt like a symbol of everything she had gained back. Days turned into weeks and the program grew. More children joined, volunteers came to help, and local media even did a small feature about her work. Her confidence bloomed, but she stayed humble, always remembering where she had started. The quiet apartment, the sleepless nights, the heavy loneliness that had once filled her days. He remained by her side through it all, not as a rescuer but as a steady presence. They shared moments that didn't need explanation. Coffee on rainy mornings, evening walks by the lake, long talks about dreams and fears. Sometimes they'd laugh until their sides hurt. Other times they'd sit in silence, comfortable in it. One evening they were sitting on a park bench watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of gold and pink, the air soft and cool. She rested her head against the back of the bench, her voice thoughtful. "Do you ever think about how much can change in 1 year?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "I do. And I think the best changes are the ones we don't plan for." She looked at him, her voice quieter now. "I never thought I'd meet someone like you." He smiled slightly. "You mean someone who drinks too much coffee and can't sit still?" She laughed, shaking her head. "No. Someone who made me believe again, in myself, in life, in people." He turned to her, his tone gentle. "You did all that on your own. I just walked beside you for a while." She didn't argue, but deep down she knew he had done more than he realized. A few days later, something unexpected happened. He told her he had received a job offer in another city. It was a great opportunity, something he had worked toward for a long time. She tried to be happy for him, but her heart sank. "That's amazing," she said, forcing a smile. "You should take it." He looked at her carefully. "You really think so?" "Of course," she said quickly. "You've earned it." But later that night, when she was alone, she felt the familiar ache of loss creeping back in. She had learned how to stand on her own again, but the thought of him leaving made everything inside her tremble. He had become such a part of her life that she couldn't imagine her days without his quiet laughter, his encouragement, his presence. The night before his departure, he came to see her. They sat in the same spot by the window where it had all begun. The rain was falling again, softly tapping against the glass. "I didn't come to say goodbye," he said. She looked at him, puzzled. "Then what did you come for?" "To tell you that this isn't an ending," he said. "You have your art, your students, your peace. You have a whole life that's blooming now. You don't need me to keep that alive." She swallowed hard, her eyes stinging. "That doesn't make it easier." He nodded slowly. "I know, but I'll still be around. Maybe not here, but somewhere close, cheering for you in every little success." For a long time they said nothing. The rain filled the silence between them, gentle and endless. Then she reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For not saving me," she said. "For teaching me how to save myself." He smiled, eyes warm. "That's the best thing anyone's ever said to me." They sat together for a while longer, not talking, just holding the moment. When he finally stood to leave, she didn't cry. She just watched him walk away, feeling both sadness and gratitude in equal measure. The next morning, she woke up to sunlight spilling across the room. It felt different, brighter, sharper, full of promise. She made coffee and looked out the window again, smiling at the memory of him. Weeks passed. They still talked sometimes, but less often now. He was busy with his new job, and she was busier than ever with her art programs. Yet somehow he was still there in small ways. In the habits he'd left behind, the courage he'd helped her find, the quiet strength she now carried. One afternoon, as she prepared for another children's art show, a little girl ran up to her with paint all over her hands. "Miss," the girl said breathlessly, "look what I made." It was a drawing of two people standing under an umbrella surrounded by hearts and rainbows. She laughed, wiping a small tear from her eye. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Later, when the event ended and everyone left, she stood alone in the empty hall for a moment, taking it all in. The laughter that had filled the room, the smiles, the colors, the warmth. She felt alive, truly alive. She realized then that happiness wasn't something someone else could give you. It was something you built yourself, piece by piece, day by day, with courage, kindness, and love. He had come into her life when she was broken, not to fix her, but to remind her that she could rebuild. And she had. That night, as she walked home, the wind brushed softly against her face. The sky was clear, and the stars seemed brighter than usual. She stopped for a moment, looked up, and whispered, "Thank you, not just to him, but to life itself, for second chances, for kindness, for the unexpected people who show up and change everything without even trying." When she reached her door, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a deep, peaceful joy. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She would keep living, keep creating, and keep her heart open, because once someone makes you feel alive again, you never forget how.